Okay, it's 12 o'clock Central Time, 10 a.m. California time, top of the hour. I think we can go ahead and get started. Some more people will probably come in the next few minutes. So hello, welcome. My name is Dave Jenkins. I am Vice President of Marketing and Digital Technologies for Iterate. And today our conversation is going to be around the low-code revolution. And we are very lucky to have some great players in this space joining us today, specifically led by our own Chief Digital Officer. Brian, is that your title officially?
Yeah.
Okay. Brian will be leading this, and then he's got two of his top engineers with him, John and Shamran, who will also be participating in the discussion. So without any further delay, I'll turn the time over to Brian. By all means, if you have a question, please raise your hand and or go ahead and put the question in the chat, and I'll be monitoring that. And we'll find some opportunities for questions, or we'll just address the questions at the end. So with no further delay, Brian, please go ahead. And Brian, let me know if you can share your screen. You should be able to.
Perfect, Dave. Let me try that out now. Let me share my screen.
There you go.
Can you all see my screen?
Yep.
Perfect. Thank you, Dave. Really appreciate you bringing all of us together. And everybody, today we are going to talk about low-code platforms and the low-code revolution, right? This is a part of the Iterate.ai series, right? We conduct. It's an event. It's a webinar and a thought leadership event that we put out, and we invite our members, our partners, customers, and anybody who's interested in. It's open to the public. The goal of this is to sort of educate and help leaders, digital leaders within organizations, to understand better about the upcoming trends and how to work with them, how to be aware of them, and how to deploy them or how to take advantage of them within your organization, right? So today's topic is we're going to talk about low code, right? Low code has been there for a while. Low code is not necessarily a new phenomena per se, right? I remember in early 90s when I first started coding. I used at that point, we used to use languages like C, C++, assembler, very machine-related languages. But over a couple of years, companies like Microsoft and others, Boland, they started releasing platforms where one could build desktop applications using low code. One of the very popular one was called Visual Basic. I remember when I was in college, I used to code in that. But then, as the industry progressed, it sort of died down. And then eventually now you are seeing the birth of low code back again as the need for digital is rapidly rising. And more and more leaders want to go to market or get to go to market with their applications a lot faster. So that need has given birth to this entire low code revolution, right? So before we go to low code, I just want to sort of think about low code is essentially not just simple drag and drop. A lot of people think about low code as drag and drop, but at the same time, it's also a fundamentally a different paradigm of thinking, right? As humans today, when we want to express ourselves, right, what we do is we write. Right. So as you see in your left, you see the picture of a person writing, right? And then there is another form of expression, which is essentially drawing, right? Which is you sort of visually create what you see, right? The former is more of, articulate and audibly create, right? Verbally create what you do. And the other one is the latter, drawing, is how you visually create and visually express yourself, right? Low code is a visual expression paradigm, right? That's why it's interesting, because once you visually start expressing things become much more clearer, right? It's like that saying, a picture is worth 1,000 words, right? With low code, enterprise leaders can visually represent the vision that they have for their organizations and bring products to life visually, right? That's why this is a paradigm shift, right? So we want to start, sort of, fixing our axioms, and at the very fundamental level, start thinking about this very differently, right? This is not just drag and drop. Low code does not just mean drag and drop, right? It's a completely much broader, bigger paradigm than that. It's about visually representing your organization's need. It's visually representing uh, a solution to a digital need, right? So now we've talked about writing and drawing. This is the equivalent of how that happens in code, right? In left, what you see is basically you write an application, right? I mean, there are a lot of engineers in this call, and most of you do this every day on a day-to-day basis, right? And then on your right, what you see is you draw code, right? These are not actually the same. They're actually completely different paradigms. What I mean by that is, what on the left, what you do is you are verbally expressing your needs for the application, and on the right, you are actually painting a picture of code, right? That's actually a different paradigm, and it's a different shift, and that's why this is a revolution. That's why this is big, because it's changing. It's fundamentally changing the way you bring about applications to life. The question is, that's all great, but why do organizations actually need low code, right? There are three major reasons. And at a very high level, first is speed, right? By using low code, you could gain speeds north of 10%, right? 10x, not 10%, 10x. 10x is a huge driver, right? It's a multiple, right? There are examples where people have obtained speeds 20x, 30x, 100x, right? Depending on the type of application, right? Speed is important because of the second need, which is because there is growing digital needs. Sorry, I made a spelling mistake there. Somehow that thing skipped. Right? Because of growing digital needs, right? Because, as you are running your company, as leaders of companies, you have the need to deploy and build applications very quickly, get to market. Because the thing about innovation is, typical careers for innovation leaders within company is actually 2 years. There is data on that, right? There is statistics on that. That's because, for 2 years you spend talking about what you're going to do. And then eventually the senior leadership is like, what did you get done in 2 years, right? That's a huge challenge. So the only way you can combat is that you have to get into action. You have to go from talking to actually doing. So if you were to do, you need a platform that can help you do things much faster. And then the third one, which we are going to talk about a lot more deeply today, is this concept of upskilling, right? There are more, especially among traditional companies, there are more and more and more web developers compared to AI engineers or compared to IoT engineers. So you need to take the engineering skill sets you have, and how do you upskill them? How do you bring them to a point where they can start building stuff? They can start drawing applications quickly and designing applications quickly. So that's another very interesting area and a need. So these are what we see as the fundamental drivers that's driving the need for low code. Another thing that's really interesting is this is not necessarily a new market. It is established, and there is already it's very well defined in the analyst space as well as in various market segments, right? What that all that means tells you is that if you're a digital leader, you heard about low code, and you hear about low code everywhere. You want to put low code within your company. You want your teams to start adopting it. This just means that people are formally capturing that information in terms of how much companies are adopting it and how much companies are using it and so on, right? In 2019, the market was established to be estimated to be $10.3 billion, right? That's a big market. That's a big number. And guess what? In 10 years from now, 2030, it's going to be $187 billion, right? So that's like an 18x growth. Imagine that 18x growth, right? That's a CAGR, that's a massive CAGR, right? Massive growth, right? Do you know what percentage retail on average is growing, right? Depending on the segment, you're growing at 3 to 8%, right? Or 9%, right? Certain markets are growing at the telecom market's probably growing at a couple of percent points, right? So you're looking at 18x growth. What that means is you are not just looking at a given industry, you're growing across all the industries. It's very similar to what you have in AI, right? AI is a horizontal force. Similarly, low code is a horizontal force. It's growing across every industry. You can have low code applications in HR, you can have low code applications in legal, you can have low code applications in marketing, customer support, services, front end consumer, and so on and so forth, right? And that propagation is creating a big growth opportunity, right? Let's also look at what sort of applications that are there, and these are based on some of the old IDC type predictions. There is a lot of different companies that predicted it. I haven't purposefully attributed them, but I'm attributing them verbally because I don't want you to get distracted, because a lot of different numbers, that lots of different players are there, because as you're predicting a future market, there is always the methodologies are very different, right? So at a higher level, the point that you want to take home is that this is a huge paradigm and an industry shift, right? And as people are estimating using various methods, it's a big number, right? And the other thing that also wanted to look at is, like, when the rubber hits the road, what are the applications that are out there? How are people effectively thinking about it, right? So low code application platforms are going to be like a growth driver. So as you have these platforms that allow you to do low code, it allows you to build things a lot faster. So then the propagation of those platforms, like if you look at 2019, there was, I think, 3 billion. That market was 3 billion. Now it's going to become 5 billion, right? Just the platforms. Now, once you have the platform, there is the whole, business process management suite, right? This was one of the areas, the RPA, robotic process automation, business process management, business process outsourcing. This was one of the areas where low code kept on growing for a very long time, right? As I mentioned, the early history, right? You had low code development for desktop apps, and then sort of in the app development space, that sort of died down or slowed down, and then everybody started using web applications and so on. But then there was this low code sort of shifted into BPO, RPA type processes, and kept on very silently kept beginning to grow, right? And now it's got to a place where that growth is maturing. You're seeing a lot of growth in that area, right? Robotic process and so on. The other area that's also interesting is this concept of citizen development, which means, you want everybody to code, because coding, just like swimming, coding is a life skill, right? And every child growing up, you want them to be able to code, right? Whether they choose that as their profession or not, you want them to code, because that's just like swimming, just like learning how to do CPR, right? Coding is a survival skill, right? So as you have a survival skill, low code makes the survival skill even better, because it's very hard to teach your child Python, but it's easier to teach a 7-year-old how to do Scratch, which is another low code, right? So low code allows, it opens up the gate for a lot more people who don't necessarily have formal training in computer science and so on, to come in and start building, right? Because today, if you look at coding is a way of life, right? Because what it means is, like, it's just the logical decisions we make today, right? The logical steps we take. So what low code does is it kind of visualizes the way of life, right? So that's another area where, you're going to have lots and lots and lots of developers who are citizen developers, who are not necessarily developers in their careers, right? They do something else, but they will all come in, and if they need a little digital app, they can build them very quickly, right? So that's another area where we're going to see a lot of growth. The other thing that's interesting is, if you look at the human language, right? There is 1.35 billion people in the world who speak English, right? And then there is I think the world population is 6.5 billion or something, right? But in the ballpark, right? I might be wrong, but it's like the numbers would have changed. But the thing is that 1.335 billion people speak English. That's a very large number, right? I'm sure there are more Facebook users than that, but the number is very large. Now, there is 1.31 billion people speak Chinese, right? And 580 million people speak Spanish, right? So these are the languages, the predominant languages that are spoken across the world, right? Let's take that and kind of look at the analogs of that. What are the languages or the capabilities that is spoken on in tech, right? If you look in the tech world, there is 533 million websites, right? There are tons of websites. We all know that, right? Out of those websites, 25.6 million, you have 25.6 million web developers today. This is today's data, 2020. 25.6 million web engineers. So especially across traditional companies, you have more of them because they all have to maintain websites, and because web came in the 2000s, so the web has been around for almost 20 years, right? So there's ample time to build a skillful workforce to support web. But guess what? On the other side, if you look at AI, there are only 300,000 AI engineers, right? That's a very small number. 25 million compared to 300,000, right? And guess what? These 300,000 engineers are today courted and pursued by Google, Apple, Amazon, Facebook, and the million startups that are out there. So if you're a traditional organization, how are you going to get to them, right? So there has to be a way where you can invent and innovate and stay at the tip of the spear and bring in great solutions to your customers without actually going to have to hire all these folks. What if you can upskill your web engineers the team that you already have, equip them, empower them to do to build solid applications, even in very complex technologies. Right. So that's the first point I want to show you in relation to numbers, right? It's staggering when you look at the numbers, right? It's kind of very eye-opening. When you look at I'm going to show you another number, the same paradigm, right? 25.6 million web developers. Let's compare that with the IoT world. There is 30.9 billion IoT devices all across the world. Way more than the website, right? That's because you're counting everything. Every device on the internet, everything that's connected to internet, every little device, your home thermostat, your Alexas, everything, your Apple Watches, right? So that number is even bigger, 30.9 billion IoT devices. But guess what? Only 6 million IoT developers are there in the world, or at least these are published numbers. I mean, these are not perfectly accurate numbers, but we are just looking at the big multiple, just the ballparks, right? The numbers out there is around 6 million IoT developers, right? So if you compare that in relation to 25 million web developers, you still lack IoT developers, right? So that's a place where you need to upskill, right? So that's why this gets very interesting. That's why low code comes into play, right? Because if you look at a large traditional organization, what you have to do is, if you are building a complicated, you're building an end consumer application, your app or your solution would actually touch any one of these 5 things, or maybe even all of these 5 things. These are called what we call the five forces of innovation. First, you need to work with startups, because there are over 1.4 million startups in the world. And then, I think 700,000-800,000 of them are in the B2B space, and they are disrupting everything, all the way from insurance, finance, marketing, retail, hospitality, healthcare, defense, all those industries, right? So you have to work with startups because they are creating this phenomena called the death by 1,000 cuts, right? So you have to work with startups to stay ahead. Second, you have to work to connect with IoT, because there's a lot of applications in retail, in healthcare, all of these sectors. There are so many use cases where you have IoT coming and playing into, right? So you have to have that skill. And then the third skill you need to have is AI ML, which is AI is like what Sundar Pichai, the CEO of Google, said. AI is like the electricity. It's the horizontal force that's just going to change humanity, right? Whether you like it or not. I mean, the cat's out of the bag. It's going to happen, right? It's just going to revolutionize the way we live, we think, we interact with other human beings. Everything we do, right? So that's a massive force. Whether you close your eyes or not, right? Whether you keep your eyes open, it's going to happen. So as digital leaders of companies, we want to be ready to compare this force and convert this force to become our friend, and harness the power of AI to provide end consumer applications in a much more meaningful way. The fourth one is blockchain, which is basically distributed ledger. Blockchain has gone through its evolutions, but as time passes, it's getting better and better and better. Distributed security is a big need for the humankind, all the way from finance to every industry. So you're going to see that propagate. And then the other one is data, right? We've in the last 5 years, we've created more data than human could ever create, in humankind could ever create in their entire existence, right? And that's going to get even further, right? This is a little bit like the Moore's law applying with data, just getting better and better, and you quadruple, double, triple, quadruple, and so on and so forth. So that's going to happen as well. So that's why, as a digital leader, you want to look at these 5 forces of innovation within your company, right? And how do you combat these 5 forces of innovation? Right. So one of the things that we wanted to talk about is that, we do agree there is 5 forces of innovation, but what does it actually mean when the rubber hits the road? So I haven't encountered 5 forces of innovation in my applications I need to build, right, or solutions I need to deploy to my customers. And when we are showing you a practical example here, right, when the rubber hits the road, where do you actually see 5 forces of innovation, right? This is a real customer example. There was one of the partners had a problem during COVID time, because during COVID, you wanted to create frictionless experiences. You didn't want anybody to touch you. They were in the gas industry, right? Essentially, they were having thousands of gas station, international, multinational company, right? Great footprint, but they wanted to build solutions where you could drive your vehicle, have your card on file, and without touching anything, you have the ability to pump your gas, right? And automatically there is a camera in front of in every station, not one camera, multiple cameras. They all coincide together, and they can recognize your license plate and then automatically charge your card. If you look at an application like that, just building the application for the end consumer is the easy part. That's the red box here. That's the part of the iceberg that's on top of the water, right? Every ship can see it, right? Any agency can build it. That's the easy part. But once you go down the iceberg, right, you have to build business logic to handle all these things. You have to read from the camera feeds, right? And there could be 10, 20, 30 cameras, right? And then thousands of vehicles coming in. How do you handle that? And you don't even know if some of the vehicles are stopped or not. You got to do a lot of motion sensing, motion estimation problems. And then you have to work with legacy systems to release the pump, right? This is a classic example of a 5 forces of innovation, right? Because you see IoT, you see AI, right? You see startup technologies integrated, you see a lot of data, right? And you can even put blockchain if you want to make it distributed, right? So this is actually a rubber hits the road example, and this is where our platform Interplay came in. That's why low code is interesting, because low code can bring all these disparate pieces together to gracefully work together, right, to build an end consumer, end market solution. And we have a really interesting platform called Interplay, and I'm going to show that to you in a minute, right? But this is not just about Interplay. I mean, this is our new platform, Interplay. I mean, our Interplay has been there for a long time, for the last 2 years. But we recently released our platform, Tiger, right? And today we are publicly releasing it to everybody, right? So what's really interesting about it is that Interplay allows you to build applications 10x faster, much, much faster. By providing drag and drop capability. You can drag and drop and start building applications with it, right? The way we do that is by doing pre-building or pre-making components, right? It's like what Mark Andreessen said, the famous venture capitalist, right? Like software will eat the world. Software will start everything. Every human process we see today will be converted into a software component. That's exactly what we did. We went and we integrated startup technologies. They are APIs. We went ahead and built AI, ML technologies, integrated them together. We went ahead and built IoT components, pre-integrated them together. Now you have a canvas where you can work, a workbench where you can put them together and build applications very quickly, right? When we talk about low code, it's not just Interplay. There are lots of other platforms, right? We are sort of Switzerland. We want all boats to float, right? But this is a revolution. We are in a place where large companies leaders in large companies are recognizing that they have to get to market faster and are coming up with methodologies on how to do that better, right? Having said that, let me take a minute and show you some simple examples on how low code works. So this is Interplay, right? And everything that you see here on your left are like sort of Lego blocks, right? Which we call components or nodes, right? The way you build the application is you drag and drop one of those and connect to another, right? And you can start building applications. Once you're ready, you click on deploy, and it's ready to be deployed in the enterprise. It'll create a Kubernetes Docker container, and bam, it'll deploy, right? And if you want to do custom code, you have the ability to write code as well, right? You could insert your code in JavaScript or Python, right? So it still gives you a lot of customization, but also provides you these pre-built packaged blocks. So everything you see here in blue are basically components from startups that we've integrated about 100 plus components from various startups. So instead of working with them and bringing somebody and trying to understand the API and your engineers doing documentation, it's prepackaged. So you just drag and drop and just put the API key in. Same logic applies to IoT. We've integrated with Adreno, Azure Cloud, AWS Cloud, Google Cloud. So it's already pre-packaged. You can just drag and drop these components and just put your cloud keys, and it'll give you access to that software. Same logic applies to AI as well, right? Very similar paradigm. We put up about 100 plus components on AI, right? We have 465 components added inside Interplay, right, altogether. And we also have blockchain where you can integrate with blockchain, and lots of data, right? So we've integrated about 15 different data sources that is used within enterprise, because at the end of the day, all major companies have lots and lots of data locked within their enterprises. So if you provide connectors to connect and pull data in, now you have an ability to reuse that data to do your AI modeling and your capabilities, right? So then what you do is in Interplay, we also provide sample applications. So these are sort of templates that come with Interplay. So you have the ability to sort of, make some changes, and then you can put a click and collect system. Make some changes, you can run like a full commerce system. You can make some changes, build like an AI model, a customer investigation system, right? This is a very simple thing where using low code with this version of Tiger, we are using low code without writing any code. In fact, in this case, it's no code. On how we can predict e-commerce shipping data, right? So this is a classic example of a model where where we are loading the data. This is actually an international electronic retailer where they're shipping all these products, right? Basically, we can predict if this given product will reach on time or not, yes or no, right? So that's a very simple example of what you can apply AI for, right? Similarly, another thing in the HR industry, as I was talking about low code and AI, these are horizontal forces. These are across every industry, right? Not just one thing. That's why this is very powerful. That's why the markets are so big, right? So if you look at HR analytics, this is a really interesting example. In fact, I wanted to show this to our vice president of HR in a couple of weeks, because this is basically where your real data gathered in one of the organizations about the employee, their job levels, their role, their training, how long have they been in the company. And it'll actually predict if this employee is going to leave or not, attrition, right? And it's a very simple ML classification problem, right? And then all you have to do is, if you were to train this data set, you have to just deploy it, right? And then you just have to click on the training, and then the training will begin, right? And then you can go in here, and you can see the model being trained. And I did all of these actions without writing a single line of code. If you were to do this in Jupyter, it will probably take you, 400 lines of code or more, right? And it's generating a report. It's done training. It's summarizing the data set. Done. Okay. So now if you look at it should actually, this is the input data that you had. This is the data you input. and it's actually showing you the input data, its variables, its correlations, everything. And it's also generating a model for you. Right now you are seeing an actual model. It's showing you all the variables, how they are correlated, and the modeling around it, right? So that's how quickly it took us to build an AI model by just clicking on a few things, bam, right? And you could do this across everything: medical industry, commerce, image classification. And we have used this type of capability under numerous different things. This is another thing that we are looking in the government sector, where you take images from satellites. Can you use AI ML to clean the images up using low code AI ML? Right? And then how can you detect these images? This is a classic example of detecting using satellite, Eurosat satellite images to say this is an industrial complex, right? So you can actually reuse satellite images more effectively, right? This is another detection that is saying this is also an industrial complex, right? The image is not clean at all, but using ML training, we trained, I think, 26,000 data, right? This is a permanent crop, right? Things like that. Another interesting application is, as you hear, it's very sad. Our hearts go to everybody, who got affected. That in Denver and various places, there has been lots of shootings in retail stores, common places, parking lots. What if you can use ML to understand people carrying weapons or even wearing rubbery masks and lock the doors automatically and prevent them from entering into buildings, right? And AI ML could do that. So this is a classic example where we are training the ML to do shoot identification, robbery action, and so on, right? Actions of various, human poses, certain types of behaviors, carrying weapons, concealing weapons, and so on. This is all real interesting applications of AI ML, right? People taking money out of cash registers, right? So this kind of shows you the practicality of it and how expansive on how this can be, right? How low code can help you really build very, very expansive solutions, right? One thing that I mentioned about Interplay is Interplay has been around for the last 2 years, and we've achieved tremendous scale, right? Really big scale, and we are growing. We can becoming bigger and bigger and bigger, right? I mean, what we've achieved so far is smaller compared to what we can become, and I think partly thanks to our partners, our members, and our customers who believe in us and have the trust to allow us to serve them, as well as our engineering and tech teams that are just going and deploying these things very effectively, right? Today we process about 9 million records using our AI capability, right? Every day, right? We run 121 AWS instances, right? All powered by Interplay. We run 100 transactions per second for some of the retailers very effectively, right? And we also run in the edge as well. Interplay is cloud agnostic, so you can run it in Azure cloud, which is Microsoft's cloud, GCP, Google's cloud, Amazon's AWS, as well as on an edge. Edge could be a tiny server that's running in a gas station, or a tiny server that's running inside your Tesla. It could be something that's running on your spaceship, right? So you have this ability to run on many different capabilities, which I think is interesting. Super interesting. So one thing that we've looked at is that a lot of times people talk about low code is exciting, wonderful, but what are the practical use cases? What can you do with it, right? These are some examples, right? In retail, we've already using Interplay and our low code and AI capabilities. We've deployed in a computer vision traffic monitoring application. I just showed you robbery and weapons detection, frictionless commerce, like license plate and so on. Price scraping and comparison for some of our customers. We've done that where we've scraped competitive pricing, competitive images, and then showed you during certain periods of time how are they competitively repositioning cells, right? So a retailer or a brand could understand that, right? Recommendations, commerce engine, click and collect, and so on. Product finders, that's another wonderful application for AI, because as you are going through beauty or any type of product selection, how do you find the product that is exactly personalized to your need, right? So that's another case. And then chatbots, customer service chatbots, that's another big area as well. And we shift to other fields like medical, right? How do you understand medical vocabulary for drug manufacturers? How do you match nurses and physicians in hospitals, right? How do you actually reclassify and organize hospital data, especially if as you go see a physician in a hospital, he orders your x-ray and he walks away looking at other patients. So when he comes back, your x-ray is properly ordered and classified and kept for his inspection. So this is not to replace the physician, but rather create better organization, right? Real practical case. Same thing in oil and gas, right? If you look at large players like BP and others today, they've all stopped drilling new wells, right? They're trying to create efficiencies with their existing production mechanisms. But how do you actually create better efficiencies in terms of recalibrating these drilling machines, creating better classification, creating better analysis and scheduling of these oil wells and so on, right? All those problems. Defense, like I'm showed you, like satellite detection, target geo capabilities, robbery weapons detection, license plate, all these things. So this you can see with low code, a very, very large plethora of use cases can be built, right? This is not just a pie in the sky vision. It is very practical. It's rubber hits the road. You can use it on Monday, right? Because one of the problems with innovation is everybody can talk about innovation, but what do you do on Monday, right? You can actually use these things on Monday, right? The other thing, it's also more philosophical, but I think this is an interesting thing my partner and colleague put together, John Notmark. It's a really interesting view, because what happens is, if you take companies that are traditional companies like asset builders, like let's take Walmart, Target, they all have stores, lots of investment in real estate, lots of investment in inventory, right? All these companies are building assets, right? Shipping companies, so on and so forth. But those asset builders are valued in the public market probably 2x, right? On top of them, you do see companies that are service companies like Accenture and Capgemini and others. They're valued at probably at 3x. Then on top of that, you have actual software providers, ISV players, right, who are providing softwares and platforms, the Microsofts, those companies, right? They're probably valued anywhere from 8 to 10x, right? 5 to 10x. Then you go from there is platforms, right? Which is what we see, Airbnb, Pinterest, Uber, all these things that are using a human network, but powering them through technology, right? Really interesting set of companies that those are valued probably anywhere from 5x to 50 plus x, right? Companies like Shopify and others. But then on top of that spectrum is what you see, this thing called AI enablers, companies that are providing core plumbing AI technology and networks to propagate. Classic example is Palantir, which is helping the government with a lot of analytics and AI and ML. And then C3.ai, another company which is valued at like 50. One is valued at 50x, and the other one is valued at 72 plus x, right? The reason why we are showing this to you is that if you are a traditional company, if you are in the asset builder category, service provider category, in the software category, by enabling low code and AI capabilities, you can boost your business and positioning up the stack, right? Because everybody wants to go up the stack, right? And even cloud companies that are providing today, pickaxes and shovels for engineers and builders and developers, they can go up stack by providing end solutions very quickly, but all powered through low code. And it can push your business, not only just what you do, but also the entire valuation of your company up stack, which is a very interesting observation, right? So at this moment, I want to introduce two of my colleagues, two leaders in our company. First is John S. Second person is John Salvador and Shamron Jacob. I'm going to quickly give an introduction to John Salvador, because both guys are very humble, so they're not going to introduce themselves well, right? John Salvador has a very interesting background. He's a PhD in swarm computing. And he spent quite a lot of time looking at distributed systems. John Salvador also worked for 12 years in the enterprise sector for SunGard, both in the public sector as well as in the private sector, ran lots and lots of enterprise projects, saw massive enterprise platforms getting deployed, right, at scale. So today he is a director of innovation in our company. He helps us lead some of our very large customer projects. John has been a part of deploying a very quick click and collect system within 10 days with one of our members, and also working on 10 to 12 plus very large initiatives, deploying like quick, rapid digital solutions, right? Then we'll come to John in a minute. And then the other person I want to introduce is Shamron Jacob. Shamron Jacob is by training is a machine learning AI engineer. He is a AI ML manager in our company, leading teams, building enterprise scale products, and he's been using low code and AI in a very effective way. He's got a master's in computer science and a bachelor's, very deeply involved in AI related work, right? And welcome both of you guys, and thank you for joining me.
Thanks, Brian.
Yeah. So, quick question to you, John. Right. As we are talking about low code, right? Can you help me understand and kind of explain to our audience where you are using low code, right? When the rubber hits the road, right? And what sort of benefits are you actually seeing by using low code? Because this is actually a paradigm, right? As we talked about, I'm sure you know a bit more than any one of us. But can you just kind of walk us through your thinking?
Yeah. Thanks, Brian. So when we look at the large enterprises, the needs and the challenges are different, and not everyone knows actually what exactly the challenges are. So maybe I'll quickly highlight those challenges, and then I'll explain like how low code is actually mitigating those challenges. So one of the first items that I would like to highlight is that the speed, which Brian already mentioned at the beginning. For a large enterprise to build an application and deploy, it's not same. It doesn't take the same time as a small company or a startup to build and deploy. The reason is there are so many different large systems are functioning, and they all have to interrelated, and they have to talk to each other. And also, the major highlight is those systems were built like 20 years ago technology, right? So they were not they are not available for any of these communication, interconnected communication between the systems. For example, if there's a payment system that's entirely running in its own ecosystem, and there may be a customer transaction system that runs in its own way, and but the payment and customer transaction has to link, and they built it only in one way, probably 15 years ago, and now it's it cannot be changed right now. So if you are going to change and adding a new application to deploy, that takes in months, right? So that is that is kind of one example where the time it takes. So how low code is actually mitigating that, right? So in low code, all these connectivities componentized. So at the very first time when you are connecting, it might take some time because have to integrate them. But once it's componentized, then the reusability is very high. That means the first application to deploy probably would take a month. I mean compared to 8 months in a traditional way. But once the first application is built, almost 80% of the components are reusable for another application, and that might take not month, maybe 2 weeks, and then the next one probably would take 1 week. So it actually the time it takes to build applications goes rapidly shorter and shorter, and then to a point where it will be just like a couple of hours to drag and drop and do that. So it gives that flexibility to the enterprises. So that is one area. The next area I would like to highlight is the skill gap that also Brian mentioned at the beginning, because the number of tools and technologies that we are using currently is vastly different compared to 10 years ago what we used. So for 10 years ago we may need like 5 or 6 tools or enterprise tools or technologies to build an application or a use case. But now it is it's probably like 100 new different tools to be integrated. And then also you can see that turnaround time for the technologies is very short. That means we may today there will be a new technology that is very very popular, and it solves the problems. But tomorrow, that may not be the same. There will be a new technology is showing up, right? So therefore, the developers and engineers to learn and up to date with all the technologies at the same time is not easy. It's because you have to be master in everything, right? The one example that people used to say is that 200 years ago there were there are some brilliant people who are mastered in medicine as well as in politics, and they know everything about it, right? I mean, we know some of the founding fathers, they did everything by themselves. But now in the present world, you cannot really see like someone who is mastered in medicine and inventing vaccine. At the same time, he goes and like writing an AI application and doing that, because it's so complex, and the skill gap is like really bigger and bigger. So how to bridge this skill gap is where the low code platforms come to play in large enterprises, that people who knew software, web development, or system level development, or the machine learning AI training. So there are like three different ways they function, but componentizing most of the tools there in low code, it helps the developers to cross train each other, and that's the highlight here, that a web developer who may not need to know the entire training and data pipeline of the machine learning, but they may be able to use some of the pieces to build a quick application. And Amazon was doing very greatly with their SageMaker now. So similar concept. But anyway, that but I want to highlight that it's not really replacing a data scientist, but what it's actually allowing is some of the smaller tasks that data scientists have to do, that is actually democratized for the citizen data scientists, and the expert data scientists can do more and more deeper level problems in that area. So that actually allows that is another benefit of the low code platform.
Yeah, no, that's a great point, John, because you can, instead of having 25 data scientists in your company, like if you are a traditional organization, it's hard to hire and retain. You can have 2 of them. Correct. And then you can upskill a lot of web engineers to sort of catch up using a low-code platform. Yeah, no, that's a wonderful point. And I have a quick I'm going to ask the same question to Shamron as well. So Shamron, you've been leading recently, especially a very large project, right? Like replatforming and building solutions, but then doing the exact same thing that you would do in traditional code, in low code. Tell us about that and what sort of performance improvements you are seeing, and just give us like some very practical examples.
Correct. Thanks, Ryan. So just to start with what John has actually touched on, low code actually is very beneficial when you're trying to develop something from scratch. And that is something that we did. We went and developed a social platform from scratch using low code. And that is something we did within 6 weeks. And if you actually do it the regular way, you cannot wrap 145 plus APIs in 6 weeks, no matter how many people you put on it, because it takes a lot of time to wrap APIs, and then the code version differs. But in low code, the special thing about low code is that your pipeline or structure remains the same. So you can reuse it everywhere, and you can change it whenever you like. So you're not changing the structure again and again. You're reusing the structure. You're reusing the way you've built your architecture or the schema of the code, but you're just repurposing the code. So that is one of the biggest reasons why we were able to wrap out the whole 160, 145 plus APIs we have for our social platform within weeks. And this is something we did using our platform interplay. Another thing I would touch up on this is that while we were doing this, we also incorporated the UI side of it using low code, which is not a very popular thing out there. A lot of people build UI from scratch using the regular coding practices. But we have incorporated this whole low-code UI version in our platform interplay, where you can actually drag and drop and build the whole page visually. So you don't even need to know coding. If that's the special part about low-code, where you don't need to know coding. You don't need to know like how this is building. You just drag and drop, build the page, put your buttons wherever you like, what colors you want, what headings you want, and then that static page with the click of a button will generate the code for you. And then all you need to do is take that code and incorporate it at the back. So that is what we built using Interplay, which is basically low code version of it. And that's one of the reasons why the whole speeding up process is something that low code supports, because it doesn't, like, you don't waste a lot of time doing manual work, because this is something that a lot of people out there do. They do a lot of manual work, and even making changes to these UI, like if you don't like the color of the button, or if you don't like the way the button is placed, you have to go in the code and you have to manually change it. You have to bring it out from there and put it somewhere up and then manage the way it looks. But in the UI version of low code that we are supporting, you can actually just do it with your mouse. You can just hold it, move it around, and that's it, and deploy it. It's going to come up with the code. So that's one of the biggest reasons why low code was beneficial in this project. We also incorporated startup technologies. We have more than 15 startup technologies running on this social platform that you developed, where we can support YouTube, we can support Whereby, we can support Vimeo, we can support a lot of other startups. So this incorporating process was also very, very simple, because all we had to do is, again, lay out the structure of how these things would work and reuse it and repurpose it. If you do it the regular way, you have to go to the startup or the thing you want to integrate, and you have to go through the documentation, you have to read the whole thing, you have to write the code. And this is not custom stuff. So you have to create the code, and then you can't reuse, because each startup has different documentation, the way they want you to use it, and they have different ways of doing it. So the regular way of doing things will not work here. But in low code, the beauty about low code is you just make one structure around it, and then you repurpose it to many other things that you want to do. So that's the reason why we could support the 15 starters we have on the screen for you guys. So this, again, this was done within days, not even days. We just had to make the structure once and repurpose it 15 times for 15 other things, and you reuse it on the platform. One of the biggest things that we are currently building, and it's almost getting done, is the single sign-on support using low code, which is a big thing out there. Nowadays, people are moving more towards single sign-on, because it's a very, very safe way of coming in and leaving a platform, and it doesn't require a lot of effort. Building that single sign-on using regular way of doing things is a lot of work at the back. But using low code, we were able to incorporate this feature within days again. And we are supporting that as of today with our platform. So you can actually hook up your website with our local platform, and we will support the single sign-on process. So all you need to do is just hook up the flow, hit our API, and we'll do the whole single sign-on for you. So yeah, these things led to the reason why we were able to wrap the whole platform from scratch within weeks. And like I said, the flow that we went in, and this is all low code. We have a UI section of low code, and then we have a backend section of low code, and then we have the data section of low code, where the whole data gets saved, and you're hitting and you're trying to get the data, save the data. So all these things, separate pipelines, are all low code based. So you can repurpose it overnight for something else. Like, you don't have to go and you don't have to basically say, you know what, I'm going to rewrite this for someone else and I want to reuse it for somewhere else. You can totally do that in low code, because the structure is the same. You're just repurposing. So all you're probably changing is the name of the database and the name of the files and the API keys. Everything else will work as it is. And that's one of the reasons why it's very popular in today's time in our platform, because not only the development time is less, the biggest advantage of doing low code is you can add features on the fly. You don't have to worry about, like, how do I add this feature, because you have to go through like 5 files of code, and I have to figure out where this should go. Feature addition becomes super simple, because since you have your building pipeline in components, you can actually just target that component and say, I want to add the feature here. So you don't have to worry about sections of it and saying, okay, you know what, I don't know how this will work in that way, in that section, because it's completely independent, and it's the way it's developed in low code. It's completely it gels very well. So all you're doing is adding the feature and moving on, and then that feature addition becomes super fast. It's within days, sometimes it's within hours, and it's something that you can turn around and give it to people to test with, and if they don't like, you come back and add more and subtract more, and then you can just roll it out. So that becomes super helpful again.
Thank you, Shamron. Yeah. So this is really interesting, because as you heard, John and Shamron sort of articulate real practical examples, right? Because these two leaders in our company, they actually run very large systems today as we are building these things for our customers and members. And what's really interesting is, like, low code is not just an early prototyping toy, right? That's one of the problems a lot of leaders in digital space are trying to get their head wrapped around, right? Well, this is great for prototype, but after I prototype, I take it to the IT teams, and they say, okay, this is not scalable. This does not run on Kubernetes. This does not scale in these systems. Does not run on premise. Does not have SSO. Does not have security, right? And then they throw it away, right? And that's one of the problems. Like, there's a lot of friction between digital innovation teams and traditional IT teams because they don't speak the same language, right? But if you do low code right, there is a way where you can get low code ready. So when you take it to your IT colleagues, all the check marks would get checked in. Kubernetes check, security check, scalability, availability check, right? Keep on doing that. So that is one way where you can take your innovation, your idea, you can draw them, visualize them, bring it to life. At the same time, productionalize them, right? And run them at scale, right? These two leaders you're seeing here, they're actually running products today, low code application at scale, right? We have 141 plus AWS only instances. On top of that, we probably have 30 or 40 plus GCP instances for our customers, right? And so on. So scale is definitely possible, and low code is not a toy. You can build massive scalable applications. Thank you, both of you. I really appreciate you guys, chiming in and kind of sharing your experience, because I want our audience to understand the practical nature of what it is, and when the rubber hits the road, can you really get it done, right?
Thank you. We just have a couple of minutes left. I'd like to open it up for any questions for anybody. There's a chat there if you want to raise your hand or just type your question in the chat. I'm also going to start the poll, launch polling. If you'd like to rate today's seminar, that'd be great. Thank you. Brian, Shamran, John, thank you so much for your time. I like low code. I think it's cool.
Yeah, we too. Yeah, absolutely. And if you have any questions, feel free to, you have all of our emails here. Feel free to shoot us an email. Happy to talk to you more. Yeah, go ahead, Dave. Thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you. And again, yes, email is there. And if anyone would like this recording, please raise your hand or just email us and we can send that out. And we're also happy to send out a cleaned up version of this deck if that's what you'd prefer. So look forward to talking with you. Again, thanks everybody.